Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tango Banter. I am Yelizaveta, and we are starting off on a new theme this month. This month, we're talking all about marathons and festivals and what is best for you, how to choose them, how do you find out about them, how do you get into them, all of the little details about big tango events that you might be curious about, we will be discussing this month. Before we launch into today's discussion, I wanted to remind all of you that next week on November 10th, that's a Thursday, from 11 to 12:30, I'm doing a panel discussion / interview / lecture on the topic of confronting your fear or fears to get the dances you want. This is a free event in collaboration with Yeva Klipscheite, who is over in Europe, and with her partner. And it's the first time I'm collaborating with them. They have been doing these events for quite some time now, and they have a whole library of past events that are available for you to check out. And to that end, some of you have been asking me if this event is going to be recorded, because for some of you, you can't make it live. And I'm happy to say that it is going to be recorded, and you will be able to watch it from their video library for a small fee. I just looked it up, and it costs about a little bit over $3 to rent the video, and a little bit over $5 to actually buy the video. So for those of you who can't join live, you'll be able to download or access the video afterwards. And I'm providing the links to both the event and to the website with the video library on it in the show notes. Now, as we launch into talking about festivals and marathons, I want to say that I have a lot of opinions about this because I've been around for a long time, and I might express some views that might be somewhat at odds with your own, and that's okay. I'd love to hear from you if you do have a different experience to report or a different point of view. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me on my social media at I'mSoTango, or email me at connect@imsotango.com. So, festivals and marathons, those are the two main big events that tango offers, and usually they are scheduled over a weekend. So there's typically going to be a Friday night opening milonga, and then there will be two milongas on Saturday and two milongas on Sunday, and typically Sunday night is the end of the event. Now, recently there's been a trend to extend the time of these events, and some of them start on Thursday nights. Sometimes they go until Monday night, but typically you might just stick to the idea that it's from Friday to Sunday. Now, the very first time I went to a festival, I was in Istanbul. I went to Istanbul with my teachers, and it was a very scary experience. It was really stressful. It was very intimidating. And I had many a panic attack. I've talked about this before in my previous episodes, that it's actually really difficult for me to feel okay in large settings with people that I might not know. So it's definitely a step up from going to a regular milonga. And if you're listening to this and you've never been to a big tango event, you might feel the way I felt, which is, what do I even expect? How do I know that I'm going to do okay? What is what is the thing to know? What are the things to bring with you? How do I make sure that I have what I need? And there's all these questions because, of course, it's something unknown. And so, in today's episode, I want to talk about each of these events separately and go over some of the pros and cons of these events so that you might have a more informed place from which to make your decision. Because ultimately, it's about what you need and what's relevant to you as a dancer, not about having to fit into a certain type of mold. So I'm going to start with the festivals. Festivals tend to be probably the biggest sort of event. I think anything beyond that is more of like a championship, which I'm not going to talk about championships this time. These championships are sort of new kid on the block. They haven't been going on for as long, but festivals and marathons also are fairly recent if we think about the history of tango. There weren't any festival types of events back in the 40s and 50s when tango was booming in Argentina. It is my understanding that these kinds of events are a product of a more contemporary age, more modern tango, maybe starting in the 90s and early 2000s. And festivals have a particular format, and what separates or distinguishes festivals from marathons is that you have teachers coming to teach classes at festivals. So my impression that the idea of a festival is to bring together in one space some of the most celebrated and successful professional dancers. Of course, you're looking for creativity and innovation, charisma. You want as many of those types of dancers to come together. And this idea that when you bring together these great minds and those great minds begin to teach classes, then it benefits the community by exposing dancers to new ideas, taking the level up by honing specific skills, and generally improving the quality and the level of tango wherever the festival takes place. So that's the ambition, the higher end goal of a festival. And I think those are really noble ambitions. Those are really great ideas. The idea of creating sort of a creatively rich, percolating soup where great minds are exchanging ideas, and all of that becomes sort of inspiration that feeds the whole community. So for many people, what festivals provide is an opportunity to be exposed to lots of different new people and new teachers. You can take classes. There's usually classes both on Saturdays and Sundays, and they kind of go all day. Depending on the size of the festival, sometimes there's classes simultaneously on different topics by different couples or different teachers. So you have an opportunity to spend the whole day taking classes, and then at night there is dancing. And it's quite exciting. It's very exhausting if you do both, especially. And there's a lot of discussion for people to decide which one they're going to do. Are they going to go to class, or are they going to go to milonga? If you go to a lot of classes, you probably won't last very long at night because the next day you have to get up and take classes again. And it's pretty challenging and very physically demanding, which in some ways feels kind of nice because it pushes your limits. It kind of wears you down a bit. And I feel like sometimes we look forward to those kinds of experiences where we're sort of pushed beyond our normal limits, and we like to feel that we're being challenged beyond our current capability. So that's a good event for that. Now, also, the other aspect of festivals is performances. So performances typically happen in the early days, when I first was going to festivals, I was observing that performances happened once during the festival on Saturday night. They usually happened around 10:30 at night or 11, and it would be typically two or three couples performing two or three songs each. And that's it. Now, over the years, I've noticed that that has been increasing quite a bit. So sometimes you're going to go to a festival where there's going to be a performance every night of the festival, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Sometimes the couples will perform multiple times, not just once. So there's been sort of an expansion of that part of the festival. And there are a lot of people who really enjoy that. And I know for myself, when I was first starting, performances were very special. They were inspiring, challenging, somewhat, stimulating, I would say. They stimulated my imagination. And of course, it's exciting to see high level dancers, bring it to the stage. And then lastly, in addition to performances, a festival is a great place to do some shopping. So retail is quite a big part of festivals. So you have shoe vendors and clothing vendors and jewelry and accessories. And so a lot of times it's a great place to go to try on shoes, to try on clothes and buy them face to face versus online, which nowadays more and more people are getting more comfortable with buying online. However, I'm still the kind of person who's going to spend 2 hours trying on shoes before I choose the one pair that I buy. So whenever people ask me where to start going to even buy shoes, like somebody who's beginning, you might not even know what brand you like or what height of your heel that you like, or what sizes are, do you need a half size or do you need a full size and which brand. So it's nicer to just have a bunch of vendors that you can go and visit throughout the festival and try out different shoe brands to choose the one that works for you. And then once you choose it, then it's kind of like, okay, this is the one that works, and perhaps you can continue buying the same brand, the same size online. So that, I would say, are some of the highlights of festivals that people really enjoy and that they seek out. Festivals typically happen in bigger cities, bigger communities, but I've noticed they're starting to pop up in smaller communities as well. And there is a sort of an unspoken rule, or I don't know, this quality that when a community gets their own festival, that's a sort of a benchmark for that community. That means it's gotten this big. It's gotten big enough to support a festival, because big events, of course, need to draw a lot of people because they're quite expensive to put on, as any festival organizer will tell you. So I've been on festival teams before, in the organizing team, so I kind of know a little bit of the back end of what's required to put on a festival, and it's quite an endeavor. So in order to pull it off, the community needs to be big enough to support it. So in that way, festivals mark a certain maturity of a community. So for example, I started tango in Dallas, Texas. And back then, the community was very small. There were no festivals and no marathons, and I didn't even know about them. It was sort of a novel idea to me that there would be an event that would last 3 days where you would just dance all night long. So my first big tango event in the States was actually in Portland, Oregon, where I attended the Portland Tango Marathon when I first visited there. So in Dallas now, a few years ago, there was a festival that started happening. And whenever I learned about it, it was this moment of like, wow, that community has really grown, that they can now have a festival. So there's a festival there that takes place in the fall, I think around December or something. So let's talk about some cons of festivals, because these qualities that I just went over might be considered all pros. Maybe there's some personal preference here and there that might make it that you don't really think of some things as pros, but for the most part, I think I'm imagining that for most of you, the ideas of being exposed to new people and watching some good performances and taking some classes is a nice idea. So let's talk about some cons. One thing that happens when you have an event that becomes very big, which it seems to me with festivals, the thinking goes the bigger the better, because the bigger the event, the bigger the revenue, the bigger the attention, the larger the crowd. And so overall, there's this push to make it bigger and bigger. But there's a certain threshold that once the event gets past a certain number, it starts feeling very impersonal. And that goes hand in hand with the commercial ambitions of an event, a big festival event. You really can't separate those two things happening. The more commercial something becomes, the more impersonal it also becomes. The two kind of go hand in hand. And so there's some criticism of festivals in this way that they're trying to bring people together and they're trying to get people excited about tango. But as people attend them, they actually can't make the connections that they want, and they feel more isolated. And frequently, I hear from people this sentiment that they go to a festival and they just end up dancing with people that they already know, which sort of defeats the purpose, because why would you pay hundreds of dollars to attend an event where you just dance with the same people you dance with at regular milongas, right? But that is something that's a very real challenge for festivals. How do you keep the intimacy of tango? How do you keep that that space that fosters connection between people, and at the same time make it profitable, make it successful financially? So you have to kind of choose. And when it comes to festivals, a lot of times, even the physical experience of the number of people in the room can feel quite overwhelming. There are some festivals that I've attended that even have 2 dance floors. And so you have one big dance floor with lots of people and one smaller dance floor that's kind of like the overflow goes there. And the way the seating is arranged, it sort of feels to me like it becomes a bit more like a train station or a bus station, where there's just people coming and going, walking and moving, and the energy kind of, it doesn't settle down. You don't feel a feeling of settle down and connect with people. It's more like you're constantly moving. Everybody's a moving target. You're constantly trying to feel out where's the best place to capaseo, which that deserves its own episode because there's some real strategy there for both men and women. And especially in a large venue, it's very difficult to find your place and have a sense of where you belong. And that can be quite difficult for people. Also, because the events are so big and because there's all these teachers coming and there's all these classes, you will end up with the situation where the level of dancing is quite diverse. You're going to have a lot of people who are beginners and sort of intermediate, and then you'll have some advanced dancers because, of course, the teachers are the advanced dancers. And sometimes teachers choose to interact with the locals and actually dance with them. But unfortunately, the trend has been that the teachers sit in their own little corner and they dance amongst themselves with each other. Maybe they'll dance with some of the local teachers or local professional dancers, but it's very rare to see the teachers actually making the rounds and dancing with people, you know, as somebody would do at a milonga. For teachers, it's really like this is a job. They go there and they do the amount of socializing they need to. They perform. They sort of do their shtick, and then they want to go. So there's this sort of division that happens between the higher level, more professional in crowd and then everybody else. And sometimes, again, it doesn't feel good. It feels sort of like you have to earn your place in the community, and you kind of have to jump through hoops, and it puts people in a lot of stress and anxiety about whether they are doing what they're supposed to and what's wrong with them. Why aren't they getting the dances that they want? And I did spend a lot of my time early on at festivals wondering that, like, what can I do to get better dances? And of course, you see a professional dancer dancing with somebody, and let's say that somebody is your level. And so automatically you're thinking, how did they get that dance? How do I get it? What do I do? And it's sort of a futile task to figure out, because really there's no rhyme or reason for it. It's such a crapshoot when it comes to why these things happen. Honestly, if this is so common, if I see a male professional dancer dancing with somebody who's not professional and who's a beginner, why are they dancing with them most of the time? Because they're hot. There, I said it. Like, it happens all the time. You see a hotshot professional dancer dancing with a beginner who can barely walk. They're attractive. That person is attractive, and you know that a lot of times wins out over level or experience. And as frustrating as that may be, that just is what happens. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I'll spend some time talking about this in another episode. But for now, I just want to say that because festivals are so big, and because there's so many people, and because there's this division between levels, it further strengthens this feeling of isolation and not being included. So for some people, going to a festival, it just underscores their inability to perform at a level that they want and get what they want, especially if you have some high expectations. You know, if somebody's like, oh, there's this big festival and you're going to go and you're going to get amazing dances, there's going to be so many amazing people, and then you go and it's like the opposite, which does happen. That totally happens. And it's happened to me many times, that some of the worst and most disappointing experiences I've had at festivals, and typically it went along with me having really big expectations. So a couple of other cons that I'll cover before moving on to marathons is it's expensive. Festivals are getting very expensive. And I mean, it makes sense that they have to be that way, because the organizers have to cover a lot of costs with renting the space, catering, hiring the teachers, flying the teachers out. They have to handle all the paperwork, the visas. I mean, I don't even know what's involved with that. It's quite extensive. So necessarily festivals are expensive. Now, they might be a little bit cheaper if you go to other places in the world. Like a festival in LA is definitely going to be more expensive than a festival in Mexico. So that might be a strategy to sort of scout around and look for cheaper festivals. But in general, That's just kind of one of those downsides of festivals, that they're going to be pretty expensive. Um, yeah. So moving on, that was all about festivals. Marathons seem to me, or the way I experienced what a marathon is, it's like once you've gone to a festival and you've met some people and you kind of got your posse around you, got some friends, you figure out what you like, what you don't like, and you sort of get to this place where you don't necessarily want to take classes anymore, and the teachers being there is not necessarily a draw for you, and maybe you don't really like performances anymore. You kind of graduate from that. And really, what you care about is the dancing. You just want to go and dance. This is where marathons come in. And I think that marathons evolved as a response to that desire for people to just have dance time. They don't want to dance and then be interrupted for a performance. They just want to continue dancing. They don't care about classes. So they don't want to like pay the extra money that it might require to host classes, because it's like everybody has to pay for that cost of the building and the time. So instead, marathons are all about let's give the dancers as much dance time as possible. So between marathons and festivals, I definitely prefer marathons because I am that person who does not really like classes anymore. I stopped liking classes a long time ago. I think just because as a follower, when I was first, going, I was really wanting to learn, but then you never can predict the level. So as a follower, you are cycling through different leaders of different levels. And 9 times out of 10, what's being taught in the class is beyond the level of the leader that you get. So I hear this comment from many, many followers, and this is, I think, an issue that should be addressed somehow, that eventually, it's this sentiment like, why am I going? I'm just wasting my time. I'm not actually learning because my partner, whoever that is in that moment, is not getting the mechanic. And unfortunately, I don't know how it is now because I haven't attended a lot of classes, but the last time I was going to classes, it was still very traditional that teachers would teach some sort of a pattern or some sort of a principle to the leaders, and then the followers learn to follow the leaders. So it's kind of like this trickle down process, which is very inefficient and ultimately doesn't give the followers anything to work on in real time that moment. It's just dependent on if the leader can lead the thing that they're being taught. So then I, started leading, and I did take some classes as a leader. And what I've noticed for myself is that I have a very difficult time remembering patterns. And after doing lots of big group classes, I noticed that I wasn't really retaining any information. Now, I know some of you might say, oh, well, you need to practice right away. You need to, solidify, practice it 1,000 times. That's fine. That might be the case, but I'm just not that kind of person that's going to do that. So if I'm going to take a class, I'm seeking out instruction that's going to be relevant for me in that moment, that's going to make an impact. So I'm always, looking for more hands-on principles that are applicable right now, that I can access right now, versus a pattern that's going to take me a long time to learn. So that's kind of where I come from. So I've decided, for me, classes are not that important. In the same way, performances are not as interesting to me anymore. And they were interesting to me for a little bit, but not for long. And it's interesting to ask that question, how do you feel about performances? Because, there's been a trend to have more and more and more performances. Doing performances is the major, most common way for professional tango dancers to become known, to gain notoriety, and to make money. So it seems that anybody in the tango world who decides to become a professional dancer, the thing that they do first is book performances, and they perform at milongas, and then they go to festivals, and then they'll go to different cities and they'll perform, and based on that they'll get hired more for privates or doing more classes and stuff. So the market of professional tango dancers performing has become extremely saturated. Everybody wants to perform, and everybody's fighting for the few slots that are available. So this congestion of professional tango dancers trying to vie for our attention has created this push and pull that there's more and more performances demanding more and more of our attention to watch. And sometimes that's fine, and other times it's not okay. And I love watching performances online. You know, my thing is, I think performances are great, but I actually get a lot more out of watching performances on video on YouTube than I do live. And I think there's some good reasons for it, because when it's live, first of all, you have so many people around you, the lighting is different, maybe you're sitting in the corner, and you kind of can't quite register everything that's going on because there's so much information. When I watch a performance on a screen, there's necessarily like getting rid of certain elements, right? The video, the camera isolates a certain portion of reality, and you sort of have this zooming in on a particular aspect of what's going on then, not taking it all in. And so for me, watching performances online, I actually get a lot more out of it. I can slow it down, I can pause it, I can rewind, I can look at sequencing, and I do. I'm a total nerd. I geek out on performances. There are performances that I've been watching ever since I started. There were certain videos that I've rewatched hundreds of times and still rewatch because they're so inspiring. When it comes to live performances, for me, they really kind of bother me. And I'll tell you why, and this is what I'd love to hear your opinion on. At a typical milonga, one of the beautiful things is the energy in the room that we create together. And I love this phrase in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. They will say, buena onda, a good wave, right? And I think that image is great, that a milonga is like a wave. I love coming to the milonga early and participating in this buildup of energy in the room where everybody warms up together, and then we kind of get into this resonance with each other. And if you think about it, it's quite cosmic and spiritual on some level to spend 6 hours with 200 other people circling on the dance floor, right? We're going in a big circle for hours and hours, and then we're circling around each other. There's something very beautiful, cosmic, otherworldly about it. I think it goes back to even our roots in tribal cultures where we circle around a fire, right? Dancing around the fire. Maybe connection to the idea of the whirling dervishes of the Sufi tradition who whirl around for hours and hours to stimulate and cause a psychedelic experience. So I think there's something very magical that we create together when we agree to walk around for hours in a circle, circling around each other, breathing together, right? We're embracing each other. And when we touch, that's science right there for sure, that when we touch, our hearts actually begin to synchronize and we begin to breathe together. So all of those things are happening, right? And we're doing that starting, let's say, at 9 o'clock. Milongas start typically around then. And 2 hours into it, around 11:30, is when the energy gets really juicy. That's like, it's really when things, you begin to kind of float, right? You're not quite so tired that you're delirious, but you're not stiff, you're not nervous. You kind of work through some of the initial sort of testing tandas, and now you really get into the groove. So some of the best dancing is really in that period between 11 and I would say 12:30, when some people are starting to get tired and leave. And that's when performances usually are scheduled. So we've just created this amazing energy. And here we're just going to stop. We're going to turn on the lights. Everybody's going to sit down and we're going to watch somebody else dance. That to me just kills it. And a lot of times by the end of the performance, I'm done. I just want to go home. I'm too tired. And I hear that a lot. Most of the people I talk to, they all complain about this. And yet there seems to be an increasing trend to have more performances, whether it's at festivals or at milongas. And I'll tell you, I attended a festival in the past year that had performances every night of the festival. And on Saturday night, there was about an hour or over an hour. It was like an hour and 15 of performances. And it was not just tango. It was like other types of folklore performance and some sort of expressive free-form performance. And all the couples performed multiple songs. And I was irate. I felt so angry. And I left. I actually left and I stood outside and waited it out. And it feels sort of insulting because I am a social dancer. I go to dance. I go because I want to dance with people. And I feel like I'm being held hostage in a way because it's right in the middle of the night, so it's too early to leave, but then I have to wait and I'm being forced to sit and watch somebody else dance. And that makes me really angry. So I'm using my podcast to vent about it. And I'm curious whether you feel the same or not. I know that a lot of people are very inspired by performances, so I am ready to hear that for some of you it's really important. However, I do feel like it would be nice if the performance, I do think about reality. Like, yes, performers need to make money. They come, they perform, they need to perform. Yes, that needs to happen. But perhaps it happens early on. Perhaps it happens at the very beginning of the milonga where people are given a choice. And there's, you say, if you want to see the performance, come at 9 o'clock. The performance will happen at 9:30, and everybody else who doesn't want to see the performance can come later. That's what I think would be fair. But honestly, I think the fear is that if people had a choice, nobody would show up or very few people would show up. So it's a conundrum. And I don't know what the creative solution is, and maybe there won't be a solution. It will continue to be this way, and that's fine. This is my 2 cents about it. So to circle back to marathons are supposed to be free of that and give you as much time for dancing as possible. I did also attend recently a marathon that had performances in it, and I was like, this is not supposed to be happening. The quality of a marathon, what makes it a marathon is that there is no performance. Otherwise, it's a festival. So it would be nice if we stuck to that, because it's disappointing when I, as a dancer, have a certain expectation of getting the dance time that I want, and then it's being interrupted. So some other pros of marathons would be that it's a smaller event. Typically, they are capped, and that's really good. Festivals tend to be multiple hundreds of people, 3 to 400. I recently heard of like 600 to 800, which seems insane to me. I don't know if that's true, but marathons typically don't go over 120, maybe 200. I don't even know if, you know, you might have to let me know if you're listening, if you know for sure if marathons go over that. But it's definitely under 200 and typically more like 120, which is great. I think it's a great number to have. You have higher level of dancers, of course, because once again, marathons are a little bit of a level up. So it's definitely not as beginner friendly. It sort of assumes that you've been around, you know the drill, you kind of know your way around the dance floor, you know how to navigate, you know the code it goes, and you know some people that you can connect with when you're there. So it tends to have a higher level of dancing, and there's more dancing in general. And I think those are all great things. Now, for the cons, for some of the more negative side effects, and they're kind of obvious and maybe not so obvious. What happens when you have a smaller tango event? You now have competition for those spots. So if an event is very popular, as there are some marathons that are so popular that they don't even need to advertise on Facebook or do any kind of promotion. They just put out a message that the registration is open, and then it's filled up within minutes. There are events like that I haven't been able to get into. So it's very competitive, and so you kind of have to be in the in crowd. You have to be connected to the organizer. You have to know people. You have to know when the registration opens. So it's a little bit exclusive, and there's that feeling of having to jump through some social hoops to get in. I even was talking to someone about different types of events maybe that I could go dance in Europe. So some suggestions for European events. And one person told me that it's like you have to know people who know people. You have to get on waiting lists. You have to apply. And even recently, I just went to a marathon that was new to me, and I met a person that I had known actually from years back in Dallas, and I saw her for the first time now in a decade, I guess. And she told me that when I applied to attend this marathon, the organizer asked her about me and asked her if she knew me. And so she gave him some positive feedback, and I don't know if that directly impacted my acceptance into the event, but I do know that when I first applied, I was on the waiting list, and then I was approved. So it might have been that kind of deal where I applied, the organizer doesn't know who I am, so they can't, they're being careful because the organizers now, they're not trying to do the bigger the better thing, right? They're trying to make sure that they have the highest level possible in one room, because that's what you go to the marathon for. And so there's this little bit of this game of sort of endearing yourself to the community in different ways so that you're invited, so that you're part of the in crowd. And for some, it's not necessarily that fun to have to play those games. Similarly, when you do get to the marathon, if you don't know some people already and you don't have those connections that could lead to more connections, it can become sort of isolating in that way, because there's that complaint about tango that there's cliques that develop, that people are very choosy. And sometimes at marathons, it's even more so. So it's a lot of like people getting together, they know each other, and so they'll dance with each other, or they've known other people in other communities, so they see each other again and they'll dance with each other. But they might not dance with somebody who's brand new, or they might be a little bit more picky. And this, once again, leads to this feeling of, do I get to be in the in crowd or not? Do I get to have the dances that I want or not? So it can be a little bit difficult to navigate that. And it kind of leads, I don't know whether this is a direct correlation and link, but it seems like there can be more drama and politics that emerges from these kinds of settings. And, as an observer of this, it's kind of interesting to realize that whatever it is that we're trying to escape when we're sort of controlling our environment, and a lot of times it like seeps in different ways. So even though marathons seem to be better, more intimate, higher level dances, just in general, a better quality event, it still doesn't mean that you're going to escape the feelings that you might have at different types of festival events where you're like trying to feel that you can have better dances more consistently and connect with people. Sometimes marathons prevent that from happening. It's like not personal at all. So this was my observation, actually. I was very surprised about my own reaction when I went to the last marathon, which I talked about a little bit, La Entrega in New York. And in terms of the marathon, it was like it hit all the points. It was a great venue, great music, great DJs, great dancers. The level was super high. But it's like I felt those feelings that I tend to want to escape. So, whenever if I go to Milonga and I don't have a good time, let's say, and I'm feeling some sort of negativity, a lot of times I'll say like, oh, it's because the setting or the music or the floor or the level of dancing, but ultimately here was this event that had like all of the best things, and I still felt the feelings. And it was interesting because I think the insight was, to me, that when you push it too far and you create this like very polished type of experience, you're trying to minimize any sort of imperfection. You're trying to get the best people in one room so that it's like the best dancing ever. The lack of contrast makes me appreciate my dances less. And that sounds kind of strange to admit to it, but it's true. I feel like if I go to Milonga and sometimes I get not so good tanda, I get like one of those times like, I didn't really enjoy it. Then when I get a really good tanda, the contrast makes me really appreciate it. And then I'm like, wow, this was amazing. And I have this like fulfillment. But then if all of the dances are really great, then it's like monotony. It's like I don't appreciate them as much. And it's kind of weird because the thinking might be that, yeah, this is like where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be this way, where everybody's like at the same level. But I think there's a finer balance when there's a little bit of both. That serves the community, when you have a percentage of the people who are not so advanced, who are just kind of working things out and they're a little bit rough around the edges, and then you have a percentage that's really high level. And maybe it's, the sweet spot is a blend of two, but in different proportions. And I don't know necessarily what the magic mix is, but this has been my observation. So that pretty much wraps up my opinion, my point of view on festivals and marathons. And obviously my preference is for marathons at this point, but I also feel like even beyond marathons, I actually like the local milongas. The longer I dance, the more I appreciate the really small events, house parties, or or environments that feel like house parties where the focus is not necessarily so much on the dancing, but more on the socializing, which I think comes with time. I hear this sentiment more and more from people. And I remember hearing it from someone years ago who said, in Buenos Aires, people don't just go to dance, they go to socialize, they go to talk, and then there's dancing, happening. And I remember listening to that and going, I absolutely am not interested in that. I just want to dance. I want to dance every single tanda. And if I'm sitting down, I'm missing out. So that was my experience as a beginner. But now, the further along I am, the more I appreciate this vibe of social connection, and then adding to that the dance element. Because when there's that social glue and connecting with people first, then the dancing actually feels better no matter what level. I've had amazing dances with raw beginners just because I had a connection with them first. So that's been kind of my observation in myself. And I'm going to finish just by mentioning another type of event that I don't spend too much time talking because I actually don't know much about them, and that is encuentros. Encuentros give me the impression that they're a little bit more exclusive than marathons in certain ways because you have to be invited. You have to sort of know people who know people. They're not advertised a lot of times. And it's my impression that encuentros are like marathons, but for dancers who are older. So it seems that dancers who sort of want to have a little bit more of a traditional setting, I hear that in encuentros, women and men sit separately, which is a very traditional model of organizing a milonga. There's a stricter observation of códigos or etiquette. And for some dancers, that's a real advantage. So encuentros are somewhat similar to marathons in many ways. They're smaller, they're more private, more intimate, and they're kind of like a little bit more secretive. Like, I don't really see pictures from encuentros on Facebook, but when it comes to marathons and festivals, after one happens, there's like pictures and selfies, and you get to actually see who was there, and that doesn't necessarily happen with encuentros. So those of you who are more familiar with encuentros, I invite you to share with me some of your insights of how encuentros compare to festivals and marathons and which ones you prefer. And I think this will be a great point for me to finish my banter on the topic today and invite you to share some of your thoughts on these ideas. And again, you can reach me at I'm So Tango on social media or email me at connect@imsotango.com. Thanks for spending this time with me. I look forward to bantering with you next week. Until then.